Hello and welcome to Sips and Substance, where we distill politics down to its essence. I'm Justin. We have Jonathan over here.
Hello.
And this week we're going to discuss corruption. So, Jonathan, why don't you give us an intro?
Well, because there's no shortage of things to be outraged about, right? With the current Trump administration, and we've been talking about a lot of those. And it ranges from the unlawful power grab things that they're doing to just the cruel and heartless things that they're doing, to some good old fashioned corruption kind of stuff, pay for play kind of things. You scratch my back, I will not put you in jail kind of things. And there's all kinds of examples. You could talk about anything from Trump's golf negotiations with the Saudis, which would really help him since he's, hey, you know what? A partner in the Saudi Gulf group. The crypto thing that they're doing while gutting crypto regulations, Trump gutting agencies that are investigating him and like reviewing contracts of competitors of his, like Boeing, all kinds of stuff.
I think you mean Musk there, but yeah.
I'm sorry, you're right, Musk. Yeah, it's hard to separate the two these days, right?
They do interviews together.
They do. They're like best buds. So maybe they'll be playing Diablo next, and we can have a special Diablo episode. For those of us that don't know us, that's how Justin and I actually first met each other. It was playing video games. So let's hope we don't have to encounter Donald Trump on there with Elon Musk. But anyway, this week we're going to focus on corruption and specifically what's going on in the Justice Department. We're going to talk a lot about the Eric Adams case, right? Because that is a tremendously ridiculous example of blatant, overt, not even trying to hide it corruption. And then we'll also talk about what's going on at the DOJ and the FBI in terms of firing appointments, Kash Patel, of course, all kinds of good stuff. And this week, I have an appropriate beer since we're talking about corruption and it's something to be disgusted with. I have Surly, a Minnesota brewery, makes some really good stuff. I have their Furious IPA. Which, as you can see, is a little bit more amber than a lot of IPAs, so it has a little bit more malt backbone to go with the fairly aggressive hops. It's a really solid IPA. I recommend Surly a lot. You probably can't get it in California. It's a Midwestern kind of beer. We're kind of on the western edge of their distribution here, I think, in Colorado. But for those of us east of me, right, take a look for Surly if you're looking for good IPAs. They have a lot of good stuff.
All right, so as Jonathan mentioned, we wanted to go through the best example that we could find when it comes to corruption with the Trump administration, and that is with this Eric Adams case.
So I think by best, you mean worst.
Yeah. So to give a little bit of background here, he was indicted by the Biden administration, and it was basically accepting illegal campaign contributions, luxury travel, and he did some favors for a Turkish official, right?
Allegedly. And by the way,
allegedly,
in case
of course,
you don't know, right? In case you don't follow East Coast politics, he is the mayor of New York. And he's been fairly controversial as mayor because he's very sort of middle of the road, trying to be friends with everybody, especially now trying to be friends with Trump. And it seems to be fairly effective for him. But he's not particularly popular in New York these days.
No, he is not. The last I checked, his approval rating was like down 30 points. So not great. So I think the real crime here, though, is this scheme that he had where you had illegal donations being funneled through folks who work at various companies, and they looked like small dollar donations, right?
And again, we need to say allegedly. Right?
Yes.
Because he hasn't been convicted of anything. So we don't need to be sued by Eric Adams and his lawyers.
Yes. Now, as I said, the crime here is that public funds matched these small dollar contributions. So Eric Adams got about $10 million worth of public funds from the taxpayers in New York to match these small dollar donations. And again, these small dollar donations came from people who could not donate this amount of money or at all to the Adams campaign.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good example of, hey, you know what? The Justice Department seems to have caught him pretty red-handed, right? And he looked to be in a bad position because all these alleged crimes, they add up. Some of them are kind of stupid, right? Some of it is really almost like stupid corruption in that, what are you thinking? They like travel on Turkish Airlines, right? If in fact he did that, why? right? That's a pretty low bar for being corrupt. You should have higher standards. I think if you're going to be a serious official and corrupt, you should pull a Bob Menendez and get a lot of gold bars or something, right? Something for your trouble.
Yeah, buy a Mercedes for your wife. Now, in
There you go.
defense of Turkish Airlines, I think these were first class tickets.
Well, that's true. I have not flown first class to Turkey. I imagine it's pretty swanky.
Yes, it's very nice. Haven't done it myself, but I've seen pictures.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I mean, these are the alleged crimes, and some of them are silly, but some of them, like you say, if the small dollar donations and scamming millions of dollars from public reimbursement actually happened, that's a pretty big deal, right? And that's the kind of thing that, hey, you know what? Our public officials should be held accountable for this. They're breaking the public trust.
Right. And then there's also this quid pro quo where they didn't do a fire inspection for a new skyscraper that was being built because they wanted it to be open on time for some Turkish official. And another Turkish official said, hey, now it's time to repay the favors that we've given you.
Yeah, so even though the Supreme Court has made it more difficult to convict people of bribery because we want people to get the benefit of the doubt when being, charged with bribery. But even though they did that, this case seems to have the legitimate quid pro quo, right? We did something for you, you do something for us. And Adams seemed to be in a really tough spot, right? So as a smart politician might do if they'd have no compunction about switching sides and throwing away any moral code, right? He decided to go to Donald Trump and be friends with Donald Trump. And lo and behold, Donald Trump has told his Justice Department to dismiss the case, right? And this has not gone over very well with the traditional people that work inside the Justice Department. The acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York resigned, right? She is an impeccable conservative. I believe she clerked for Alito, correct? Or either Alito or Scalia, one of the two.
Right.
She is. You couldn't find a more buttoned down conservative lawyer, and she's like, nope, this is just wrong. And member of the Federal Society, all that good stuff. And then another attorney from the same office, Hagen Scotton, also resigned. And I know you wanted to read a little bit of his resignation letter. It kind of lays out why these people think this is a ridiculously bad idea.
Yes. So the acting U.S. attorney, she wrote like this 8-page letter to Emil Bove, who is the acting deputy attorney general.
Yes.
Acting DAG. There you go. And then he wrote like another, say 8-page response explaining, hey, why you're wrong. And yes, I accept your resignation. Both of those are in the show notes, but you're right. I wanted to read the resignation letter from Hagen Scotton because this is how you resign. It's a sort of a mic drop moment, and it's about as good as it gets from a DOJ employee. So I quote, "There's a tradition in public service of resigning in a last-ditch effort to head off a serious mistake. Some will view the mistake you are committing here in the light of their generally negative views of the new administration. I do not share those views. I can even understand how a chief executive whose background is in business and politics might see the contemplated dismissal with leverage as a good, if distasteful, deal. But any assistant U.S. attorney would know that our laws and traditions do not allow using the prosecutorial power to influence other citizens, much less elected officials, in this way. If no lawyer within earshot of the president is willing to give him that advice, then I expect you will eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion. But it was never going to be me." Boom. Mic drop.
That is a really, really good resignation letter. And he wasn't the only person to resign, because as he hinted at or alluded to, Bove did try to get all these other lawyers in DC, in the office in DC that handles these kind of things, to file this motion for him. And I think it was 7 people resigned, something like that.
Yeah.
Until somebody did actually sign it for him. And it was done under the guise of, well, I'm preventing a bloodbath at the agency, and I need to do this, or everybody will have to resign. And I know we have a little bit of difference views there. I don't like that move. To me, right, if you're going to stay on in that office, you're going to have to corrupt yourself, right? You're not going to be able to do your job without being interfered with from the political arm of the Trump administration. It's happening now. It's going to happen again. So I don't see the usefulness or the sort of the nobility of taking a bullet so the other people can stay on and have to resign later or corrupt themselves to do other political biddings of the Trump administration. I think I would rather have seen the entire office resign. I mean, that would be hard to spin, right? It's hard enough to spin for them with 7 people resigning and these very public resignations, right? It doesn't get through to a lot of people. But if an entire office resigned, that might make a little bit more of a stink.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's clearly a lot of heat, right? They are responding to this. This is all over the news. And, the person who effectively jumped on the grenade, so to speak, he's about to retire. So he effectively saved the office. You could put it that way. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, you still have attorneys who still need to do work. And if you gut the entire office, then you actually hinder justice to some degree. Now, you're right that eventually they're probably going to be asked to do something that they cannot do in good conscience, right? And they will eventually have to resign at some point if this keeps up. And I think hopefully that what has happened now with these mass resignations, it gets the higher ups in the DOJ to back off a little bit. If they don't, then yeah, we're going to have more resignations. But I think giving them a chance to respond is wise, because at the end of the day, you have to adhere to pragmatism, right? Like if everyone resigns, then no one can be prosecuted. But if half resign, you still get the same amount of heat and you can still continue to do work. Again, we're not there. Mm-hmm. So who knows what those internal deliberations were like.
Sure. But, and it's always easy to say somebody else should quit their job, right? Obviously, it doesn't affect me if this person quits or doesn't from that point of view. But again, I mean, in this particular office that handles public corruption or something like that,
the Public Affairs Office,
we're a month in, right? Mm-hmm. And they're already demanding that they do this. And I'm guessing that even if they haven't resigned, right, somewhere somebody in the DOJ and Trump world is keeping notes on who these people are, and they might find themselves on the receiving end of a pink slip before too long anyway. So this is a case where I think the symbolism probably outweighs the practicality, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see.
We'll definitely see what happens, because I think, as we both agree, some more stuff like this is going to come down the road. And what are you going to do now? Are you going to just pick a name out of the hat? Well, I'll do it this time so we don't have to resign. It's like, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think this is where it's like, if asked again, then the entire office should resign, because then that means that this initial wave of resignations didn't do anything.
Right. And I imagine I'm unfortunately thinking that it's probably going to be when asked again, but maybe not. You never know. I suppose you could hope for the best and prepare for the worst, right? But and also the resignations weren't just in the Department of Justice. People in New York were quite miffed. 4 pretty high New York City officials, like deputy mayor types, have already said they're going to resign. And so people across the spectrum, actually, from the conservative U.S. attorney, right, to Democratic political operatives in the administration of the city of New York, people are disgusted by this sort of blatant corruption, which sort of brings us to, well, what kind of corruption is it here? What's really going on? Is the Department of Justice acting in bad faith, or are they doing what we'd come to expect in terms of plea bargains and deals with the accused and things like that?
Yeah. So, let's go through briefly what the law says. So in our show notes, the DOJ chief of staff makes, I think, a reasonable argument. They say, look, Snyder versus United States, which was that Supreme Court case that said, oh, yes, bribery is illegal, but gratuities, that's not explicitly illegal for state and local officials. Now, I think on its face, to the average person, they're the same thing, right? But the majority argued in the Supreme Court that bribery is you pay someone up front to get a favor, whereas a gratuity is the favor is done and you're paid back later. And that's sort of what happened with the Eric Adams case, right? So Adams got all this money. He didn't do anything for that money. He just got it.
And then later on, right?
Yeah.
They ask him to do something. And now the problem that I see with all this argument is, like, in a vacuum, we can use our favorite little qualifier. In a vacuum, that's a reasonable argument to make about some case.
Yeah.
But not this case.
Yeah.
Because if you look at why Bove said that they're going to dismiss the case, he had a writing filing where he said, this is nothing to do with the merits of the case. And here's the DOJ chief of staff saying, oh, it's the merits of the case that are bad, right? That's why we're doing it. It's like, nah, we know you already said that that's not it. So to come back later on and say, well, we told you that it had nothing to do with the merits of the case, but really the merits of the case are bad, right? It's like, forget what we already said, even though we really meant what we already said. We're going to pretend that this is the reason.
Right. And then, it's also the DOJ's prerogative to focus on other types of crimes, right? During the Bush administration, they moved a ton of people to terrorism because, hey, they wanted to focus on that part of the law. And during the financial crisis, the Obama administration tried to shift more people to white collar crime. Whether or not they were successful is another story, but, they did attempt to do that. Sure. And this is pretty common, right? The president is allowed to tell the DOJ, hey, I want to focus on this policy. It could be drug crime, white collar crime, what have you. So again, I think this argument in a vacuum isn't unreasonable, right? But
possibly in a vacuum. But again, in this case, right? First, again, they said the merits of the case have nothing to do with this. But they're finding plenty of time to try to start investigating other corruption, other public corruption, but not this one in particular, because we have to devote our time to the other public corruption. Doesn't seem to pass the smell test for me.
Right. I think it's very obvious that they just want leverage over Adams. So they're dismissing the charges, right? But they're doing it without prejudice, which means they can hang this over him.
You can bring it back whenever you want to.
Right. And I mean, this was insane to me. But Eric Adams was on Fox News with Tom Homan.
Yes.
Yeah. And Homan said, yeah, if Adams doesn't comply, we're going to have him on a tight leash. Something to that effect.
We'll be up his ass, he said, more almost literally, he said, we'll be up his ass if in his office if he doesn't comply. Right.
And to me, that's the game, right? You're just publicly announcing what this is really about.
They're saying the quiet part out loud and proudly at this point, at that point, right? There's like, this is what we're doing. This is why. And in the filing from Bove, right, it's, hey, we want him to be able to carry out Donald Trump's policies.
So some may argue that, hey, don't we do something similar when you testify against a mob boss or a drug lord or something like that? We always say, hey, we'll give you a plea bargain or immunity to a particular criminal offense. But this isn't for justice, right? This is for a specific policy. I can't think of any time in history, U.S. history, where you withhold charges for some sort of political gain. Like, can you imagine if Biden went to Bob Menendez and said, hey, we're not going to charge you if you vote on this bill?
Yeah, it's people basically
freaking out, right?
It's political blackmail. It's exactly what it is, right? And so, yeah, and again, it's not. We're not speculating here. These are things that the Republicans involved have actually said or written and put out in public, right? They're not hiding it. We're not making this up. We're not thinking, you know what? I'll bet this is really what's going on. They've told us this is really what's going on, right? So to come back and try to say, well, we want to divert resources and this isn't really necessarily corrupt. It doesn't really fall under the bribery statute. It's all a bunch of crap where they're after the fact, like, maybe we shouldn't have said these things. Maybe we need a real reason for this, right? Yeah.
Hence the resignations.
Exactly. And then I think some of the backpedaling comes down to, oh, wait a minute, this judge actually has to sign off on dismissing the charges, which we'll get to in a second. Another thing, though, I think we should also remember is that Trump loves converts. He loves nothing like he loves Democrats that have come over to his side. Right? You need to look no further than Tulsi Gabbard and RFK to see what he does with people that used to be Democrats and they're now on his side. So now Trump loves Eric Adams, right? So that's part of it as well. But again, right, the leverage, don't forget about the leverage, because if Trump really loved Eric Adams and that's all he wanted, he'd pardon him. As we've seen, Trump is pretty liberal with the pardon pen, right? But he's not pardoning Eric Adams. He's saying, we won't charge you now as long as you play ball with us.
So yes, you bring up the judge. They had a ruling recently, and the judge basically said, well, I need outside review because there's no adversarial process here.
Yeah, and it raises the question. Like, I think a lot of people that aren't intimately familiar with the court proceedings, thinking, well, if the prosecution doesn't want to bring charges, can't they just say we're not gonna, right? And you'd think, well, yeah, you kind of can, except there's a rule out there that says the court has to agree, right? And it doesn't happen a lot that the court says, you know what, no, you can't drop charges. But it can happen, and it has happened, and it could happen again. And this judge wants to hear from somebody else who's presumably impartial, right? To see what he should consider doing. I mean, I think he made a pretty interesting pick, right? He is a former civil ACLU guy, right? He's been involved with some ACLU lawsuits appointed by Biden, just barely snuck by the Senate, right? And he's pretty liberal. So he asked a conservative solicitor general from the George W. Bush administration to be the outside reviewer, to really kind of insulate him from claims that, oh, you just are being a liberal and you're going against this, right? So it will be interesting to see what he wants to do with this.
Yeah, I mean, technically, he could also appoint a special prosecutor if he really want to, but I don't know. That's a pretty drastic decision, and I think, given the political reality that we live in, where he's seen as like a really liberal judge, it might hurt more than it helps, right? So I think, allowing this solicitor general from the Bush administration to, basically make that call, I think that's wise for him specifically.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the solicitor general does come back and say, you know what, you should appoint a special prosecutor. That would be really interesting.
Yeah.
I would be curious to see how that plays out. I don't expect that. I think we talked before that I think we both expect them to say, you know what, make them dismiss it with prejudice. If they want to dismiss it, they have to dismiss it and be done with it. So we'll see. Right? There's a lot of options.
Which, again, is kind of fair in my opinion. It's their prerogative. They could say, hey, you know what, we're not going to do it. And now the leverage is gone. The political leverage is gone.
But it's
it is, for sure. It's because we have all this evidence.
Corruption. Yeah. He did it. They know he did it. Well, allegedly he did
it.
They allegedly know he did it because they said, we're not commenting on the merits of the case. They believe the merits of the case are such that they could get a conviction. DOJ doesn't, as we've talked about before, they don't go to trial if they don't think they're going to get a conviction.
Right.
So they're pretty confident they're going to get a conviction, and they're just not doing it because, again, Adams would still know that Trump basically took care of him, right? And I'm going to guess that for most people out there that have been caught doing some corruption, there might be more skeletons in the closet that somebody could be worried might come out, right? So I'm going to guess that he would probably hold up his end of the deal for getting off the hook from these alleged crimes and incidents that Trump is wanting to let him off the hook for.
All right, so let's move on to another player in this game, and that is the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul.
I think it's important to talk about her in the politics side, right? Because we have this corruption. It's alleged, but the evidence seems pretty strong, right? And the dismissal is not because we don't think we can convict. It's because we think we can get him to do what we want. And Trump wants to show other people that, hey, if you come over to my side, we'll take care of you. Forget the Democrats, come over here, right? So yeah, as you mentioned, Kathy Hochul, governor of New York, is getting involved.
Yeah, so she has the power to just flat out remove Adams. There is a process in New York law that allows this to happen, and even though it hasn't been used successfully before, FDR started proceedings to remove the mayor of New York for a much worse corruption scheme. It involved judges lining their pockets and just typical stuff from back in the day.
Yeah, and I don't know that what I would say it hasn't been used successfully. It kind of hasn't been used to completion because this mayor knew he was out, so he resigned. Right. So basically, FDR got what he wanted. He just didn't have to go through the whole process. But it seemed like, reading back on it, he was gonna. If this guy hadn't resigned, he was getting the boot. So I mean, Hochul can say it's never been done before. Well, that's technically true, but it would have been, but the person resigned. But it brings us to the question, is this something we want to do, right? Is this a good precedent to set? When the governor steps in and says, yeah, I know you elected this guy, but he's out. I don't think he's fit to serve anymore. So I think we need to talk about, and I think you've done a good job of sort of outlining, as we talked about, it's like the possible reasons to act here. What are you trying to do? Are you protecting New Yorkers? Are you making a public demonstration against corruption? Right? How urgent is it? And I think these are definitely things that Hochul should consider and seems to be considering, at least while she's trying to figure out what to do.
Right. So there's the corruption side of things, but then there's also the immigration side of things, right? So Mayor Adams has said, hey, you know what? I'm going to let ICE come in here and I'm going to cooperate with the Trump administration and I'm going to help them accomplish their immigration goals. Mm-hmm. And so the governor of New York has to also take that into consideration. It's not just about corruption. So right now, she's sort of biding her time. She's not going to use her power to remove him yet. What she has done, though, is she's appointed a special inspector general to keep an eye out on the mayor. And she's empowering city officials to take legal action against him. And she's also expanding the state comptroller's operations to make sure everything is kosher. And I believe that there's legislation in play right now to protect undocumented immigrants as well. So those are the pieces of the puzzle right now. And now it's sort of like a wait and see approach, right? We're waiting for what the judge says, and we're just sort of waiting on public opinion to Kathy Hochul's actions, right?
See, to me, all of that sounds like sort of half measures and things that don't learn any of the lessons from the previous debate, right? If your whole thing is, hey, we need to protect undocumented immigrants and make sure he doesn't do anything else ridiculous, right? That's just missing the moment, right? If you come out and say, we're going to keep him in power, but we're going to make sure he doesn't do anything to the undocumented immigrants, that's just not a good political position to be in. It might be the right thing to do, but if you get rid of the mayor and put in a decent mayor, that mayor will probably do that anyway. But, the big thing to me is not that he's a threat to many New Yorkers, because he's not actively a threat to people. He's a crook, allegedly, right? If you are allegedly a crook and they think they have compelling evidence to show that, and clearly Hochul does, or otherwise she wouldn't have gone through all this, right? You got to get rid of a crook. You can't let an alleged crook maintain office. Anybody who's corrupt and done things like this, and if you're convinced that he has, you can't really make a case that person has not broken the public trust. If you think that person has broken the public trust, you need to make a demonstration that, hey, we will not allow that, right? There are too many people now getting away with doing everything breaking the public trust. Example number one would be Donald Trump, right? He's been impeached twice and Republicans have let him off the hook, right? He had people storm the Congress. He inspired people to storm the Congress. He didn't say directly, hey, go storm the Congress and break into their office and take a crap on Nancy Pelosi's desk. But he riled up the crowd and sent them towards Congress, and he's back in office. We have too many people getting away with abusing the public trust. And this is one where Democrats can say, nope, not on our watch, out you go. And she's like, It just strikes me as political cowardice. It's like,
yeah, she's not meeting the moment.
No, the moment is right for some Democrat to stand up and do something. I mean, we had the mayor, the governor of Maine is now a hero because she said, see you in court. That's how little the Democrats are actually doing of substance, when that's the best resistance to sort of Trump overplaying his hand. This would be a really good example of that's enough, right? There are lines. You can't cross all those lines. You cross this line, you're out.
Yeah. And you know what? We always remember the trailblazers, right?
Yes, that is true. We know who FDR is, right? Will people talk about Kathy Hochul 60, 70 years from now? I'm skeptical.
We've sort of talked about the Trump administration protecting your friends from prosecution, right? That's where the Eric Adams case lies. And, Trump has leveraged the justice system to benefit himself.
And Eric Adams should feel happy that he fits right in with the January 6th defendants.
Right. So I think a lot of people sort of expected this, where people's risk analysis, I think, led them to vote for Trump, even though they didn't necessarily approve of his behavior, is that they didn't think that he would punish his enemies, right? And in my mind, that's so much worse than protecting your friends from prosecution, right? They're both miscarriages of justice, of course, but one is much more harmful to society.
I'm going to agree with you in part and dissent in part, right? I'll
Ah,
concur and dissent. I'm preparing myself for more SCOTUS coverage coming up. That I agree with you that, right? I think that that's worse, right? Putting innocent people in jail is supposed to be the one thing our Constitution protects against, right? We'd rather keep some guilty people free than put innocent people in jail. So
right.
it's completely against the American DNA to do that, and the Constitution, right? It's just wrong. But I'm not sure that a lot of the voters aren't happy about this. He's been saying from the start, right? We're going after these people. So I think the
Sure.
MAGA crowd wants him to punish his enemies. I think
Oh,
you're
for
right.
sure.
I think you're right in that some of the mushy middle types that
Mhm.
voted for him, they didn't, I don't even think they considered that. I think they're thinking Trump's a tough guy. The economy stinks. He'll make it better. Right. I think that's, in my mind, that's the extent of their deliberations about whether to pick Trump or not. If people are seriously thinking about what he's going to do with prosecutions, I'm going to say that that's not the people who are the undecideds, the low information voters.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to separate the MAGA crowd. I was speaking more towards the mushy middle, like you mentioned, as well as sort of like the Republicans who know better, right?
Yeah.
Think the Tom Tillises of the world, Senator Tom Tillis
Okay.
in North Carolina, who they really believe that Trump isn't going to do these things, and so they'll vote for someone like Kash Patel and Pete Hegseth and whatnot.
And Pam
So
Bondi.
yes, so there is an acting U.S. attorney for D.C. named Ed Martin, and I want to read part of a letter that he wrote to Congressman Robert Garcia. So if you don't know who Robert Garcia is, he's a Long Beach area congressman, and he's on the DOJ committee, and he basically said, "Oh, here is a dick pic," and he showed a picture of Elon Musk. This is in reference to Hunter Biden's dick pic that Marjorie Taylor Greene showed on the congressional floor. So that's sort of the background there.
You got to love the high standards of Congress, right?
Yeah, and so he went on CNN and he said some stuff, and this is what Ed Martin said to him in a letter. At this time, I respectfully request that you clarify your comments from February 12th. During a live interview with CNN, when asked how Democrats can stop Elon Musk, you spoke clearly. What the American public wants is for us to bring actual weapons to this bar fight. This is an actual fight for democracy. This sounds to some like a threat to Mr. Musk, an appointed representative of President Donald Trump, who you call a dick, and government staff who work for him. Their concerns have led to this inquiry. Okay, come on.
Well, you know what? We want people to. That's what I mean, it's exactly the kind of crap that I expected from these people. Unfortunately, you'll note that when we had our discussion about, well, you may not, but I'll remind you, we had our discussion about who they're going to pick. It doesn't really matter because they're all going to do this, right? These people are all going to do exactly what Trump wants. They know Trump wants him to do this. They're going to keep it up. They're not going to stop, and even if the court tells them they have to stop, I'm dubious that they will. I just this to me, I think this is a feature of what they're doing, not a one-off or a mistake or an aberration. And I think this is part of what I mean, and it's kind of a good lead-in, right, to Kesh Patel in a way because he is famous for having an enemies list, and now he pretends it's not an enemies list, right? But hey, he wrote it as an enemies list, an enemies of democracy, or whatever he titled his ridiculous book. And he's now in charge of the FBI. The FBI is going to become the enforcement arm of this kind of stuff. And as you've said, this is really troubling because we're going after stuff from things where it's. I can't imagine he's talking about they're actually going to have a bar fight. If there is a bar fight over these policies, I would be quite surprised, right? It's not the metaphor I'm going to choose, but it's a metaphor that Republicans use all the stinking time, right? And nobody has a problem with it then, but now they have a problem with it because, oh, this guy doesn't like Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
Yeah. So what should the response be, right? Because to me, as we said before, going after your enemies, orders of magnitude worse. And I think this is where you actually have to really show some fight. The corruption thing, it's just like, it'll probably be forgotten, to be honest, by the American public. But if
Probably.
you start going after the First Amendment, I think no matter what kind of voter you are, you could be the lowest information voter or super plugged in. Everyone knows what the First Amendment is, right?
Yep.
And I think this gives the Democrats an opportunity to really go on the offense here.
Yeah, I think it ties in with other things that are going on. I mean, we haven't talked much about it, or at all really. But the Associated Press is suing the Trump administration over being barred from press events because they won't say Gulf of America, right? Again, blatant First Amendment violations, right? The Democrats should be jumping all over this much more loudly than they are, and I think you're right. Really push this as well. It's like these again. You can go back to. I talked about a narrative that would be good for the Democrats is they're a threat to your safety. And here's a really good example, a threat to your freedom of speech. They talk about freedom of speech. They're full of crap. They don't want freedom of speech for anyone except them. And here you go.
Yeah. I mean, so if I'm Robert Garcia, I just do a media blitz. I just double and triple down on this. I call Elon Musk a dick. I call out this, acting U.S. attorney and say, you know what? Try and indict me. Go to a grand jury, asshole. See how well that goes.
Another thing he could do is, again, take cues from some of the whack job Republicans have done lately and stand up and say whatever he feels like saying and go further on the floors of Congress, because then they can't do anything.
Right.
You're allowed to say whatever you want on the floor of Congress, and then by law, they can't do anything about it.
Yeah, speech or debate clause. We will link that in the show notes.
So I would say as nasty a thing about Donald Trump, Elon Musk. I probably wouldn't say nasty things about his family, but I would leave him appalled about the things that I would say on camera. And like you said, it might goad him into doing something really stupid by taking him to a grand jury or try to arrest him for free speech violations.
Yeah. So I mean, I actually think that Musk and this Ed Martin guy are much easier targets right now. For some reason, Trump, he is slipping in the polls, but not to the same degree as Elon Musk is, right? And I think you just got to start taking the easy wins first, because eventually, there's going to be Trump fatigue, right? No president has high approval ratings for a long time. I just don't think it makes sense to attack Trump in his first 100 days per se, but a year from now, that's when you can really be effective in attacking Trump. But now, I think, not less so.
I think there is an effective avenue here, and I think you're right that I would go after Musk first, because the approval ratings are going down, the economy is getting shaky, and people are getting nervous, and Trump is like, it's not my fault, right? If you can make Musk sort of the focus of people's anger, then Trump will be the first to kick Musk to the curb. Mm-hmm. And that would be a battle victory, if we want to use stupid metaphors. We'll be partners with Robert Garcia in spirit, and we'll have a.
Hey, I don't want a letter from Ed Martin, man.
Come on, we double down and dare them to arrest us, right? No, I don't think we want to do that. We don't have the money to pay for a really good defense like he would. But in any case, right? If you can drive a wedge between Trump and Musk and get Trump thinking Musk is doing all these things that people don't like, and that's why you're failing in the polls, and he gets rid of Musk, that's a step in the right direction for Democrats. And then if he's out of the way, then Trump is the only person left standing to take all the heat and all the abuse and all the hits in the polls.
Well, I think that's a good stopping point, right? I understand that it can sound like really partisan to just be going after Trump and Musk, but look, we had really conservative people, principled conservatives, resign in protest over the corruption over at the DOJ.
A lot of them, not just one.
Right.
Yeah, there's definitely bipartisan outrage here among people that are not sort of slaves to the political moment, right? If you are, these people, by all intents and purposes, they seem to be very principled actors on both sides of the aisle, right? The Democrats resigning in New York City, the DOJ employees resigning in protest, right? These are principled people across the spectrum that are like, you know what? This is too far. This is too much. Stop this. We won't be part of it. Hopefully it's sending up a warning to people, and people will be like, this is something that we can't get behind. I guess we'll have to see, though.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye on this. I can't imagine that we won't do another podcast on DOJ or FBI corruption within the next year. So stay tuned for that. But anyway, make sure you like, subscribe, and tell your friends about this. And we'll see you next week. Take care.
Bye.